So Anish, Megan, Todd, thank you guys so much for talking about how we're using open source in government. Super helpful way to kick off the day. So up next, we've got a couple of lightning rounds just to keep it kind of crazy, keep you guessing. So Gunnar Hellekson, where you at? Yay. So Gunnar is with Open Source for America. He's also Chief Tech Strategist for Red Hat's Public Sector Group. So join me in welcoming him. Thanks.
All right, everybody. How you doing? All right. Well, Noel figures out my presentation. Raise your hand if you're if you work in the federal government. Keep your hand up if your agency is using open source software. Keep your hand up if your agency has participated in open source communities. Keep your hand up if your agency has released an open source project. Congratulations. Congratulations. Okay, so my name's Gunnar Hellekson. As she said, I'm the Chief Technology Strategist for Red Hat, looking at all the presentations from Anish and Todd Park and Megan Phillips. I'm going to apologize for the quality of my slides, but I do sell free software for a living, so I can't. So that's one of my hats. My other hat is as co-chair of Open Source for America, of which there are many members here. It's nice to see many familiar faces. How you doing? Deb, Salona, hello. Let's go to the next slide. So we won in 2004. OMB issued a memo that said that open source software was, for procurement purposes, the same as proprietary software. Seems like a number of agencies didn't quite get the hint. We were still getting questions about, can we use open source software? Is it secure? Is it legal for me to take free stuff? And so there were a series of agency memos that followed up that OMB memo in 2004, and then DoD in 2009 dropped this bomb of a memo. It was about 3 pages long with this like enormous appendix, which said that not only should the DoD procurement agents be considering open source software, but that they should be they should actually seriously consider participating in open source communities, and it listed all the reasons why they should. And so that's a big deal, right? So let's go to the next slide. So we often, at Open Source for America and all of our constituent academic institutions, companies, volunteers, we often get questions from folks in government like the ones above. We'll actually have CTOs come to us, CIOs come to us and say, do you have any idea how much open source we're using? Because I can't count it. There's no way to do it. And it's tricky with open source software, right? Because nobody's buying a license. It could just be used. Nobody has to ask permission. It's just there, and it's everywhere underfoot. Another question is, why aren't there more government open source projects? How do I open source my own project? How well are the OMB and DoD policies doing? And so if we had an infinite number of resources and we were totally omniscient, we could probably do a census of where open source software is being consumed in the government. Of course, we can't do that. So instead, we decided for this report card that we developed to kind of describe what an ideal set of agency policies might look like. And this is both descriptive, right, and prescriptive, right? So now we have a way of measuring an agency's ability to consume and produce open source software, and we also have an ability to now show agencies this is what you need to be doing if you want to consume and produce open source software. So we go to the next slide. So look at the budget, right, because we want to see where the software money is being spent and where the pain is. We want transparency in the operations. We want to see open standards preferred. We go through. If you go to the report card on the website, you'll see the address in a second. You'll see the kind of methodology we use. I don't think the methodology is perfect, but I think this is a good kind of stake in the ground. This is an excellent start, and this is after all the first report card. We'll be doing another one and another one and another one. Let's say FOIA policy is actually extraordinarily important because there is a tremendous amount of software and data that leaves agencies through the FOIA process. They usually have to be compelled, right? The most famous one is probably the VA Vista software, the electronic health record. The technology neutrality memo was fantastic, and of course OMB saying that there's going to be technology neutrality and that we should consider open source software right alongside proprietary software and that we should be promoting open standards and open data is great. But you don't really see a lot of traction on that until you see the kind of supplementary memos down at the agency and the office and the department. So we're looking for that as well. And finally, and I think most important, is a lot of agencies are struggling, even though they may be consuming open source software very, very well, a lot of folks agencies want to be contributing to open source projects. They may develop projects in-house that they want to open source, that they want to give back to the public, and the conversation starts with them going to their CIO, their CTO, saying, I want to release this code. And the CIO says, go talk to council. And then you never hear from them again, right? And so we need policies, we need a procedure for being able to do this. So we go to the next slide. So these are the measurements. State Department employees, if you're looking for your agency, it's closer to the bottom. And actually we struggled with whether we wanted to actually put numbers on this or put a letter grade on it. And one of the reasons we were reluctant to do so was, again, this is prescriptive. This is supposed to help agencies understand what they can do and ways that they can help open source inside their organization. So the Department of Defense is way at the top. Dan Reisacker, among the many authors of the DoD memo. Congratulations, 82%. Very well done. It's almost unfair, though, to say that the Department of Defense wins at this. So what is your budget, Dan? Yeah, larger than everyone else's. That's accurate. So of course the DoD has really big problems and an enormous budget to try and solve them with, and so they've probably tried everything at least once. And so open source is probably among those things. So Department of Energy is next, which makes a lot of sense. You got a lot of scientists who are very familiar with the open source process. You got the national labs, so that makes a lot of intuitive sense. And then you see some clustering going on down at the bottom end of this. Now the nice thing is that it is lumpy. Actually, if we go to the next slide. Okay, so the good news is that you got Department of Energy, Department of Defense, great big no-nonsense agencies, and they are taking open source very, very seriously. I think that's not a point to overlook. There is broad agreement that's that clustering at the bottom, that 40%, and generally what the policies that those agencies have are, yes, you can consume open source software, full stop. They haven't yet made that next step of what does participation look like, or what does contribution of code look like. So the fact that there's consensus is great, but we still have a lot of agencies that need to to move the ball forward in order to fully exploit all of the advantages they can get from open source and the open source development process. All right, I think the next slide, and that's it. Thanks very much, everybody. I'm instructed that I can take questions. Oh, awesome. Oh. All right. Bye, guys.
Called off from the sides. Okay, so our next lightning session is with the very famous Andrew McLaughlin, who's with Civic Commons, and I think he's got more than 10 minutes. We'll see. He's got 5. Just kidding.
Let's see, we just need to flip on my... computer. That's good. There we go. I'm experimenting with new presentation software today, so if it's a debacle, you'll know who to blame. I'm Andrew McLaughlin. I recently left the government, as my lack of tie will attest, and was in significant danger of spending more time with my wife and kids. So one of the things I decided to do was get involved in Civic Commons, which I'm going to be presenting today. So basic story behind Civic Commons is to try to help cities and state and local governments, which typically do their technology projects in isolation, to figure out where the commonalities lie, and then to build bridges across government lines so that these cities can build the things that they want to use in common together in a collaborative way. The good news is that, of course, this is already happening. Collaborative development by government agencies is taking place at many different levels and in lots of different ways. And For example, there was a story recently about how the state of Minnesota built a new unemployment compensation management system and is now sharing it with the state of Iowa. So it's not like this is not happening. But basically, we think that there is an opportunity to build a broader platform of different modular components to provide different sorts of functions for different public services that cities can use in common and, most importantly, for free or at low cost. The goal that Civic Commons has set is that if we can get broad participation, we think we can save $1 billion over the next 3 to 5 years by using open source and proprietary software developed in common. So how do you do this? Well, you need to have cities. You need to connect them up with the technologies that are available. These can be proprietary or open source, or they can be web-based services, or a combination of the above. We need to hook cities up with information resources, in other words, other people who know what they're doing in other cities, documentation on issues like the legal dynamics around open sourcing, something that you've been working on. And finally, to hook them up with support organizations, everybody from vendors to nonprofits to volunteers and others that are in a position to help with their technology projects. So Civic Commons is working on a number of things already. I will embarrass in a moment the first crew of Civic Commons people that are here in the room today, but they're getting to work already at cataloging the Civic stack, in other words, documenting the software that's available and already out there. This is necessary if you're going to be able to build an open marketplace that allows you to match the tools with the needs and the support. They're already working on the federal IT dashboard, so this is a package that Civic Commons is going to be taking and moving into open source land so that any city or any state or local government can put it to work in their own environment. They've taken under their wing San Francisco's enterprise addressing system, which is a sort of a basic platform for managing geolocated and geocoded data, in particular addressing data in the city of San Francisco, super useful for cities to be able to use data for planning and the delivery of public services. Likewise, the Federal Register, which requires a pretty high level of standardization of data going in, but nevertheless is a very convenient way to take official government publications, official government documentation, and make it generically available as standardized machine-readable data, which is a platform which you can build all sorts of things on top of. And then the one that I'm most excited about is the Open 311 system, which is being, in particular, contributed by DC and San Francisco, along with New York and other cities that have built these systems to take citizen inputs through whatever mechanism the citizen wants to send it in, text message, mobile phone picture, phone call, email, whatever it might be, and then manage the flow that ensues. In other words, taking the problem, ticketing it, handing it off to the responsible agency, getting the updates as they come back in, closing the ticket, mapping all of this so that citizens can see it in real time, providing dashboards for the political leadership and others to see the performance of the agency, and then, if you do it in an open way, enabling new modules to come in for trash collection or fire protection or police or whatever it might be. But it becomes, you start off with a simple 311 system, it becomes a full backbone information management scheme for the city. So those are some of the projects that are underway right now. It's a growing village of participants. The DC CTO, Code for America, Open Plans, and O'Reilly put in the sort of initial money and effort and labor to get it going. But as you can see, we've got a growing list of participants. And let me just say, at the moment, where's Brian Sivak? Oh, there's Brian. So Brian, former DC CTO. Where are Michelle, Michael, and Jeremy? Right over there. So these are Code for America volunteers whose initial project at the moment is getting Civic Commons up and running. Is anybody from Open Plans here? Oh yeah, there's Philip Ashlock. Now, of course, and last but not least, from O'Reilly Land, Carl Fogel. So any of the people who just raised their hands are people that you're going to want to connect with during the break to find out how you can get involved. I want to say one note about taking this internationally. Since we are at the State Department after all of what we just said applies equally and in some ways even more urgently to cities like Jakarta, Nairobi, Bogota, La Paz, and so forth. These are cities that have to provide the exact same suite of services to their citizens. They need to provide emergency management. They need to pick up the trash. They need to enable public safety. They need to fix potholes. They need to do all of the same things that these cities in the United States do. And so our fervent hope is that we'll be able to get participation, contribution, and execution of these open platforms for cities and state and local governments in countries outside the U.S. as well. So finally, how can you get involved? Well, there's a website, a mailing list, a Twitter feed, and a hashtag, all of the usual ways. And I would urge everybody in the room who's interested to meet one of the people who raised their hands and find out how you can get involved and make a contribution as well. Thank you very much.
Andrew, thank you so much. So we're going to go on to our next panel. I want to invite a few people up to the stage. I know Chris is right here. We're going to talk about how we got here, industry and open source software. So we'll be joined up here by Jeremy Allison, the creator of Samba, Chris DiBona from Google, open source and public sector programs manager, and my buddy Darren Crape from the State Department, who's a social media specialist. Thanks.
Testing. Great. There you go. Thank you. We all have microphones now. Actually, most of you do. If you hit speak, you can just, yammer and play some music, whatever.
So you can hopefully hear all of us. I'll take a really quick couple minutes to introduce our guests here. Just real quick, my name is Darren Crape. Work for the State Department. I work for the Office of Innovative Engagement in the Bureau of International Information Programs. I think that's enough about me. So I want to introduce our
not really. There's a lot of people here who have no clue whatsoever in how the State Department is structured, how you guys deal with your information technology. So you shouldn't assume we know anything.
Yeah. Well, I don't know any of that stuff. I'm on Twitter though, so if you want to find out more, you can follow me on Twitter. That's probably the best way.
Yeah.
It's D Crape. So if you're following on Twitter
with a K.
Yeah, with a K.
Yeah.
So if you're following techatstate on Twitter, my guess is that people have probably just tweeted that out. So.
Yeah, I'm DiBona, and he's Jerry.
Yeah. So do you want to introduce yourselves, or I have your bios here?
It's up to you.
Okay, well, how about you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Chris DiBona. I run open source public sector programs and a small project for .org called the Rwandan Education Commons for Google. And actually, I used to work in this building on the 4th floor as an intern 15 years ago. So in AIM. So any of you who remembers those days, brother, go.
I'm Jeremy Allison. I've been doing open source software since before it was open source software.
That's right.
Back when it was free software. So since about the 1980s. I'm co-creator of a software suite called Samba, which very few of you probably know, but probably runs somewhere in just about all of your organizations. Yeah. And if you buy I like to joke that if you buy a network attached disk drive that's less than 5,000 or costs more than $1 million, then it's running my software, which is probably true.
Pretty cool. Free software.
Yeah, free software. Yeah. And I actually work for him, which is...
Yeah, Jeremy and I worked together for...
Yeah, since the days of the Silicon Valley Linux
1997.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Okay. Great. Well, I mean, the idea of this session is really to set the overall landscape. How do we get here? So, the first question for me is, what is the difference between open source software and the quote-unquote traditional software?
Okay.
So I love this one because I have a great analogy. I'd like to
he loves this.
Come up with one. So the difference between open source software and proprietary software and sort of secret software, I like to explain it as the difference between science and alchemy. So proprietary software
Explain, Jeremy.
Well, I'm just about to, Chris. So alchemy will come to you and say, we have this stuff that will turn lead into gold for you. Trust us, it works. It's really cool. And, some of the time, maybe it does. Open source software basically says, here's a procedure we think will turn lead into gold, and here's how we do it. And if you think it's wrong, please help and collaborate. And it's essentially, it's developing software in the same way that the scientific method works. You can look at all the steps that go into it. You can look at the pieces that are building the software that you use. And if it's wrong, if it has flaws, if it has security holes, anybody can see this. There is complete transparency of everything within it. Another analogy is architecture. I mean, do you go to, when you want to build a bridge in the state, do you want to go to sort of someone who will publish the plans, will give all the materials and the load-bearing stresses, or do you go to bridge builders or us? Our bridges very rarely fall down, but we have a secret method of doing so. So yeah, that's basically my.
Yeah, for me, the only thing I'd add is that, other than the scary bridge analogy, so thank you for that, is the real difference for them is control, right? When somebody writes a piece of free software or open source software, and you take it and do with it what you please, it's really what you please. It's not what they allow you to do within some small restrictions on the free software licenses. So it's pretty terrific. They can't tell you can't use software in a certain way. The original creators of free software and open source software can't tell you can't use it because you're the State Department and they don't like your history. They can't tell you can't use it because you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim. You know, I mean, they can't do it because they're also a customer of some other government. I mean, it's remarkable, especially as you become important, frankly, as the U.S. government is and as large companies become. They can't tell you can't use something because a competitor or another nation state dislikes you. So free software and open source software is a remarkable source of liberation in my mind. And there you go.
So yeah, just one final comment. The interesting thing when people say, well, it's not free, they're meaning the cost to support, which is true. Mm-hmm. But in terms of free as in speech, it really is free.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that people need to remember.
Yeah, it's really important. So.
Okay. So from that, I have a pretty good idea on how this is useful for organizations. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of things you just listed, you can't restrict their use and so on. So as an end user, you know, as personally somebody who doesn't know the code, doesn't want to get their hands messy, mm-hmm. you know, how is it beneficial to the end user?
Well, I noticed you've got two iPhone devices here, right?
Yes.
Those are piled full of free software, open source software. So the benefits that most end users see is wholly separate from the philosophical basis and science of it all. But you all benefit. In fact, anyone, you know, I'm not going to do the raise your hand if you own a cell phone thing.
Raise your hand if you don't own a cell phone.
Yeah. Well, or it was taking away security. But no. But seriously, it's like I look around the room, I look at the firmware on these microphones, I look at the projector, I look at your cell phone, not literally at your cell phones. And I know that open source either had a huge hand in building it through GCC or the other embedded development environments which rely heavily on GCC.
GCC?
GCC is the GNU compiler collection that people use to target embedded devices overwhelmingly, like 99% of them. Or I see things, you know, with full operating systems like iOS or Windows or Android, and those are just hugely full of open source software. So as an end user, often you don't even know that you're using it because it's already part of some commercial thing that you bought and you think is proprietary software. But I just see it as the fruits of labor of tens of thousands of open source developers who really do want you to use it and are happy that you're using it and don't need you to recognize it. Mm-hmm. So, you know. Yeah.
So I'm going to use another analogy because I like these. I've been doing this a long time, so I've kind of got them ready. The cool thing, why should you care even though you're not a developer, you're just using this stuff? My analogy is essentially, everybody always uses this eventually, is one with cars. So when your car breaks, unless you're very unlucky and you own a, no, I'm not going to name names, but I have problems with a certain car I own. You don't necessarily have to take it back to the dealer to get it fixed. You can take it to any repair shop. And the reason for that is that the information on how the car works and how to repair it is not proprietary. It's equivalent to the open source code. And for the same way, if you are simply a user of open source code, and you know, there you have, you're using Drupal or whatever, and something goes wrong, you don't have to go back to the Drupal Foundation or whoever it was who wrote it and say, oh, this is broken, would you please schedule a fix for me in your next release? So first of all, if you have the skills, you can go in there and fix it yourself. Now, not many people do, obviously, but more importantly, because everyone else can get access to the code too, you can go to any number of essentially repair shops around the world, wherever you are. You can, and this is a great thing because it can actually build a local software industry. You can end up with local industries. One of my great collaborators is a German, is a guy who actually founded a German company that does service on my software. And they actually write a great deal of it now. But that company was founded specifically to provide German language and European support to the software that was created jointly both in the US and Australia. And they didn't have to ask us permission to do that. They just set up their repair shop and started selling services. And they're now a multi-million-dollar corporation. They employ lots of other hackers. They pour resources back into the software. It's a great way of jump-starting a software economy, whereas if you've got proprietary software, you can resell it if you are if you have that deal with the manufacturer, but you can never repair it. For any repairs of proprietary software, you have to go back to the manufacturer, submit a bug report, and hope that it's important enough and enough people have suffered from it that they will fix it in the next release, or maybe not. Maybe you're the unlucky people in the world who've ever hit this bug. That doesn't happen with open source software. So that's why I think it's actually important, even for people who don't code and who aren't interested in looking at the code.
Okay. All right. So we have organizations. They get the software for free.
Yep.
It's open source. We have members of the sort of software using public that get higher quality software, support and so on. How do you make this a sustainable model? Because we have companies out there that they're sustainable because they make money, so they can pay their staff and so on.
Sure.
So if you're giving away your software for free, it sounds a little kind of communist. So
we prefer socialists. We prefer socialists, actually.
Yeah,
socialists. Okay.
That's where I grew up. Yeah.
Well, I would point out, one of the great tenets of capitalism is, your business problem isn't mine if I can get it cheaper, right? A lot of people feel that open source and free software rose up because proprietary software companies were ripping people off. And they couldn't provide the service, they couldn't provide the computer technology fast enough. Whereas the developers who were depending on this technology, they just needed an outlet. They needed a way of moving technology forward that wasn't based on the shipping dates of an Oracle or a Microsoft or a Solaris or pick your favorite vendor, as the internet rose up, this is a great example, there were other web servers out there other than Apache, but they were so slow and engaging and so damn expensive to procure that everyone went to Apache so fast because it was responsive, it gave them the technology they wanted, and frankly, they did it without ripping them off, right? So, it's just the computer business has been very, very profitable, but some parts of it don't deserve to be anymore, because frankly, the customers aren't getting their money's worth. And so they ran to free software because it was giving them their money's worth. They could accept the uncertainty. And remember, people have been using Apache since 1994, 95, when it was first being assembled. So, it's a matter of need, right? You cannot move the technological base of society forward if you're beholden to commercial manufacturers all the time.
So free software is communism in the same way that kids in kindergarten being taught to share is communism. Okay, yeah. Or socialism, yeah. So why?
Or more appropriately, it's communism in the same way the National Science Foundation maybe is communism, and the people that get their grants from them, or when professors work together on research.
Yeah.
Well, people would say they're socialism, right? Because they're paid for by the tax base. But anyway, but it's more like when you see people doing research together from different companies or different firms or different academic institutions, they can create enormous, ridiculous joint venture agreements that take months or up to a year to create, or they can just work together in open source, and then science moves forward, society moves forward.
So why did I create a file server?
Yeah, why did you do that?
Yeah. Why I did it was because I needed it.
Yeah.
The only one I could use
nice
at the
that you
time.
guys get to use it, but it was about him.
That's right. It's all about me.
Yeah.
The only alternative file servers I had at the time, they were buggy. They didn't support long file length. They just didn't do what I needed them to do.
Yeah.
And so, I helped write this thing along with a lot of other people, released it because building a file server wasn't my full-time job. It is now, of course. And in the same way, why does IBM, Oracle, and essentially Google, why do we all sell Linux? I mean, none of us want to really write an operating system. IBM wants to sell services.
Apple wanted to sell BSD.
Yeah, Oracle wants to sell databases. Google wants to sell Android phones and run a search engine. So writing an operating system and run it isn't our business. So if we collaborate and we build an operating system together, which is what Linux really is a collaborative industry effort to build a common operating system, then all of us make tons of money.
Well, we also spend less for it. I mean, your iPhone would have taken another 3 to 4 years to write, depending on how much they wanted to invest in it. You know, your iPad wouldn't have come out until 2014. You know, I mean, it's just, you know.
So companies are making really good money at this. WordPress,
and the value of what's being created is immense. I think Jim Zemlin of the Linux Foundation they did a survey on how much it would cost to recreate Linux from scratch, and it's in the billions of dollars.
Yeah, and that's just Linux. You know, we're talking about over 6 billion lines of code across something like 31 million individual files that have been open source. Last time we did our survey of the web, and it's a staggering amount of productivity. It's leaving science behind if you don't use it. You know, it's like you would never expect someone going to get their PhD in math to have to relearn the calculus, to rediscover it themselves. You know, it's the same way with computer science. Nobody expects you to say, you know what, I know the linked list is really great, but I have to redo that myself. I have to rediscover binary searching. I have to rediscover this myself, you know. That's absurd.
So I'm incredibly mean because sometimes, my file server implements one of Microsoft protocols, I often have to go out for dinner with Microsoft engineers, and I often say to them, what, you guys have to write all your own software? Wow, that must take years.
and it does.
And it does.
Although they're able to use things like BSD and MIT. Like the first Windows TCP sockets library, which is the way you get to the internet back in the day, actually was derived from the BSD libraries, the same ones that are.
And even big promoters of proprietary software eventually changing. I think Microsoft uses Hadoop, which is an open source engine behind Bing.
Yeah.
Because I mean, trying to create your own in that area was it's too costly. If you can share the cost,
and it's just,
you can build better businesses.
It's accepting being, you know, it's like putting on a huge 50-pound pack on your back when you're about to do a marathon. If you don't have to, why do it? Right?
Yeah.
So actually what we're releasing is very much a hybrid ecosystem where you have proprietary software running on open source.
Yeah, kind of. Although what happens
I just don't see the difference, I guess.
As the open source gets better, what happens is the proprietary software tends to sort of rise up the stack and do more and more sophisticated, more vertical things.
Yeah.
Because open source is the great sort of commoditizer of
It's funny though, you know, when you look at extremely specialized software, like say oil field management software and that kind of thing, it gets so expensive to develop that the industry will often create consortiums to develop that software together to save money. And sometimes they'll open source and sometimes they won't. But it's funny, as things get specialized, there's like if you picture an hourglass shape, there's this little part in the middle where there's not enough industrial demand and it's a creative enough business, like say games or something, where there's not as much open source being done there. But once it gets too expensive and too specialized, the industry groups come together and do it together because otherwise it's too costly. Software is really expensive to write, especially that kind.
Yeah.
Or it becomes so commoditized, or so common amongst us all that we all work on it together, like in things like Linux and BSD and the compilers and the Office suites and all this other stuff that we do. So, yeah.
So okay, I think a lot of us here are from government.
So I love government.
Yeah. So do I. It's great.
Well, I think that actually, you know, one of the things that really is, I've always thought is a huge drag, and this is not me pandering to my audience, by the way. And I felt this when I worked here, was that people spend a lot of time slagging on government work and government workers, and frankly, treating us government workers poorly. I mean, if I put on my old government worker hat, you know, it's like I remember I would walk through the 4th floor, and I just kept on thinking, you know, at some point they have to pull the asbestos out of these walls. At some point they have to repaint this place, you know, and it kind of bugged me. I was like, you know, these are the people who are in public service. You know, they're serving the taxpayer, they're serving the citizenry of this country and of other countries too. So, well, can't we treat them a little better? you know, and I feel that way when I would see the software that would be subjected to us. In government, it's like, you know what, there's no reason why government should have worse data systems, worse ways of doing their business, because your business is important, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be here, you know? Anyway, so I don't know where I was going with that, but the long and short of it is, it's like, you know, government doesn't have to be behind. They don't have to be subject to the absurdities of some of the contracts that we have.
Yeah.
You know?
So how would you recommend, you know, so we have all of this open source software.
Yes.
How would you recommend government taking a look at all the software that's out there and all the, you know, potential uses? How should we go about it? How should we pick out which are the good ones? And because, you know, usually it's kind of easy just to go give some big proprietary software manufacturers lots of money.
Sure, yeah. And eventually maybe pay them to maintain, well, or something. You know, the nice thing about open source, and it makes it hard to track in government, but every single person in this room, you can download some open source piece of software and start using it and seeing if it fits your needs.
Just don't do it on OpenNet.
Yeah, don't do it on OpenNet. I would never have done that while I was working here. Well, when I was working here, we still had the Wang VS terminals and stuff. Nothing around those things. But, you know, even when you're at home or something or on your personal laptop, just try it out. See if it works for you. And if it serves the needs and you think it could serve your needs here in the organization, you know, just find a way of getting it on the network and start running it, you know? So that sounds scary, but I have to tell you something. It's no less secure than getting some proprietary piece of crap and running it on your network too. You know, I mean, I can't even tell you how dangerous some of the applications that you guys are running are. You know.
Well, I used to write.
I really can't. I'm not allowed.
I used to write proprietary software for a living, and you know, things have changed a little since then. But essentially, it was always, look, if it's good enough, it works, ship it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't. Well, it's less so, because there are less constraints. I don't have a ship date, but then again, I don't have a marketing department either. And so one of the reasons why it's hard for government to use open source software is because there's no slick marketing department saying, hey, use this file server. It's cool. It's great. It has this. There's no way for you to know about what it is that we do.
Yeah.
So one thing I would say is trust your technical people. And I know for management that's anathema. That's kind of those people are grubby. They're trolls that live in the basement. How can you listen to them? But they really do know what works and what doesn't. Really do. So going to your technical people and saying, you know, we want to get into this open source software stuff. We don't know what works. We don't know what's good. What would you recommend? You know, what do you know about? You may find that they've actually been running some of it for a long time and they just never told you. That actually used to happen a lot.
It still does.
Yeah, one of the ways, because what happens is that the technical departments will be told to do something, oh, and here's no money and here's no manpower, just get it done.
Oh, and put it through a 14-month procurement process. And they're like, or we could just download it.
Yeah, and so a lot of the time the easiest way is to just download something and make it work. So a lot of the time your technical people will already know what it is that works, what is, you know, if you obviously you have to have standards of quality and security, and that's where, you know, vendors that actually sell open source software, and obviously the most prominent one there is Red Hat, they come in really handy because, you know, they will sell you for much more than it would cost you to get for free the same code.
Well, they also sell support along with it.
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of being a little mean to Red Hat here, but it's true. But there's
no end of vendors available to support open source.
Yeah, the magical fact of it going through a vendor somehow blesses it and makes the same code that you could have downloaded for free secure and, you know, safe to use. No, I'm not being negative. I'm actually pointing out an advantage of value that many companies add is to say, look, we'll stand behind this stuff. You're not on your own. If you feel unsure about the technical level of support you can get, we will stand there. We will, you know, my friend's company in Germany, that's what they do. Literally, they sell people code that they could download and run for free.
So I think we have a few more minutes. Yeah?
I want to
and
take some questions.
we definitely want to take some questions.
But the microphones are empty.
Yeah.
Carl, hit your button. Hit your button. Hit the speak button.
Does this actually go? Oh, hey.
Yay, it works.
Power. Okay. Also, I think this is more for Darren and Jeremy and Chris. Please jump in. The more the government can codify what it means to deploy open source, the more it can sign contracts with vendors. It's not realistic for your staff to know how to deploy everything. You do have to just cut a check and hire someone sometimes. But I've seen this happen. The government will hire someone to deploy something open source. I'm not going to name any names. And because it isn't really codified beyond the words open source, what they get is a bunch of open source components tied together with some proprietary stuff mixed in it. And in the end, they're still a little bit locked in. So is there any effort underway to describe this in a more formal way so that the government can actually know when it's buying open source that it's going to get the phenomena, the dynamics that Jeremy and Chris just described?
Yeah.
Interesting. So that the support restrictions don't end up, straitjacketing.
Yeah. If you're going to sell us something that doesn't lock us in and you're going to prove it to us, and here's the 3 pages that describes how.
Yeah. Well, complete disclosure, I deal with IT, but I don't deal with sort of a lot of the big infrastructure stuff, so I don't deal with that a lot, but I'm sure that we can find somebody here who can discuss that.
I think that's an interesting point, because how do you create a support contract that really works for the department that also preserves that channel into the innovation that is open source?
But this actually does, one of the questions that I had written down that I was curious about, and this kind of leads into it nicely, is, so a lot of software is produced within the U.S. government and then also with contractors. So, is it possible to have like a clause in that contract to get engaged in the open source community where that proprietary software is a requirement that it then is open source? Is that,
So we've been seeing that sort of thing pop up. So the National Science Foundation, I think, in a lot of their NIH, in their requirements docs for grants, they'll require the software be released under an open source license or under the public domain. NASA, as they've tried to open source more and more of their software, they've hit this problem where a lot of their software is actually written by contractors, and contractors can not comply with the federal rule that requires that the federal government doesn't own copyright, and they put things into the public domain. So there's like a carve-out for that, which makes sense in a lot of procurement situations, but it makes it very, very difficult to open source things. So trying to include that rulemaking in procurement for proprietary and custom-built software, I think is a really important one, because it allows the government to then pool their software and share it amongst different departments in ways that they can't do right now. So yeah, I think that'd be something that'd be refreshing.
I don't want to take much more time, but there are some the government can release open source software. There's some misunderstandings that float around about what you can. But anyway,
can we do that in the break?
So let's say I buy everything that you two have talked about.
Great.
I want to channel a senior executive for a moment who is personally liable for private information that might get out into the public.
Yeah, I hit that with the Department of Commerce myself. Yeah.
So this person has to it's a hot potato. Who do I throw this hot potato to so I don't go to court? I can say to Microsoft or Oracle or whomever, well, it's a bug in your software. It's your problem. I couldn't really do anything about it.
Sure.
But I can't do that to open source.
Well, actually, Oracle is selling you open source.
Pardon?
Oracle is selling you open source. If you buy their operating system, you're buying Linux. You're buying an open source operating system, not their database.
So in essence, you're paying them to blame them, and that's great.
You can still pay somebody to blame someone for open source bugs.
If you look at some of the brilliant examples we had this morning of mashups or efforts to pull all of these disparate pieces together and create some very innovative sources of information. If I'm a senior manager, I don't know where those pieces are.
Sure.
So how do you balance the argument of for an agency to say, when you make these choices, how do you associate responsibility with some of these key pieces so that there's that question of risk?
Yeah, so
Chris, can I answer this question?
Who's this?
Hi.
Sure. Hi, Greg.
It's Greg Ellen from the FCC. I'd like to answer this question with a question. When was the last time a government agency sued a software company for, when was the last time you or another agency actually sued a software vendor for a bug in their software or a support problem?
There's been some non-delivery suits, but not around bugs.
Yeah.
Unless I'm wrong. I'm always wrong. But I think one of the things that comes up when we discuss the prize thing and the competitions for the prizes, how do we know that the output of those prizes is going to be available? That can be hard. I think that it's good when we create APIs though, and this is almost an orthogonal case. When we create APIs from the government, we have service level sort of agreements, even if this is not a reliable API that you can count on 2 years from now, or when the administration changes in 6 years or whatever. We hit this at Google too when we create APIs. How can you be sure that the Maps API will iterate in such a way that you can keep up with it? This is actually just part of computer services more than it really is about open source in some way. But as far as blaming people, you can always pay someone to blame and to fix things for you.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question.
And can I finally make that comment? I was really
Yeah. This is actually really important, right? Because we talk about this openness as if it's like.
Let me ask this question first.
Okay.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your service and branch logic. And with respect to each of the gentlemen to my left and right, amnesty is vital to scholarship for challenging 20th century learning curves, both in the commercial sector and open source. We need to take the beast off our back. Windows for Workgroup, by all definition, whether PC or MS, is open source. And we simply need to say all ships rise.
Okay,
With respect
I think
to,
you're doing performance art at this point.
with respect to Vioxx on Windows for Workgroup, this was a Ponzi scheme. And any number of individuals may believe that sudden cardiac death
So, sir, thank you so much, but everybody really wants coffee, so I'm going to give it to one more question right here, and then
is
we'll
a
do
matter of perspective. We can never bring back the dead. However,
And the hook.
We-
Thank
we-
you so much.
and we can virtualize all of this for scholarship.
All right, thanks.
So on the notion of suing and accountability, what advice would you give with respect to the engineers in the audience, such as myself, who are not lawyers?
Sure.
How do we deal with the myriad of licenses that comprise open source, from GPL to LPL to MIT, BSD, Apache? And as these frameworks become more and more voluminous, they're using pieces from everywhere, and they're being incorporated and ingested into larger libraries and frameworks. How do we get around that so that when we call general counsel into these sessions, they don't have a coronary?
Yeah.
So the nice thing about most of those licenses is they like really well written pieces of code. They're standard components.
Yeah.
And they fit together or don't fit together in very well known and very well understood ways. Now maybe not for all lawyers. Well understood for some.
Yeah.
And this is really a matter of educating. This is what I found: educating your legal department. Back when I first started, we wrote GPL software, and legal departments in corporations were like, "We can't touch this. This stuff it's communism. All our source will escape. It'll destroy our business. How could you even think of this?" And now, sort of 20 years later, it's like, "Oh, GPL. Oh, yeah, sure, we understand
we know what to
that.
do with
We
that."
know what to do with that, But this new GPL v3, that's weird, it's strange, it's communism, all our source code will escape. It just takes a little time for these standard components to get well understood.
Yeah, and some legal departments never become comfortable with some of those licenses, right? But usually what I tell people when they're starting out is like, the permissive licenses, the lawyers love that stuff. They love MIT, they love BSD, they love Apache. It's really easy to understand. It doesn't really impose any actual restrictions on how you use the code. So start there and see if that works for you. And then what will happen is, almost universally, then they say, oh, well, we really need to use Linux too. And everyone understands that. And then, okay, so we'll accept the GPL a little bit there. And then what happens is it sort of tempers your legal staff and the people who look after contracts, they get to that point where they start recognizing things and the rest.
Yeah.
As a developer, you start a different way. You say, well, okay, this thing has this license and I want to put this thing in it. Does that work out? And that's just,
Will they fit together?
again, an education group way of doing things. Carl wrote a book called Producing OSS, which goes into
Very
some
good book.
issues. And,
Could recommend that.
I think, is that available online for free as well? Yeah. So you don't even have to procure the book. You can just go to and same thing with the two books that I wrote. It's just, they're not as good as Carl's, so just test.
So I well, no, just real quick. We also deal with this with proprietary products. I mean, we've had to go and negotiate.
Every proprietary license is different.
Yeah.
Every single one.
So,
and they're more restricted.
So I have one request. What will the government do for me?
Yes.
There's one thing I would mention. It's unfortunate I couldn't ask the previous panelists.
Yeah, because
there was this. I was incredibly impressed with Todd, and I can't remember his second name, but the healthcare applications and how that was created. That was just that was an amazingly innovative piece of work. And I couldn't help thinking while I was watching that with 3 very well chosen software patents, I could shut all that down really easily. I could just block everything that he wanted to do and put a tax on it. If I just had 3 well chosen software patents, that's probably all I would need. So if there was sort of, what could the government do for me? If you could stop issuing software patents, I think that would be a very, very helpful. in terms of innovation within software, I think that would be a very, very helpful thing. Because
it's gonna handcuff the department. It's gonna handcuff the government.
It's gonna handcuff entrepreneurs. It handcuffs free software developers. It handcuffs proprietary software developers. So
it's literally going to cost you all billions.
Yes.
In
Pretty much.
extra costs.
Remember, everybody almost lost their BlackBerries over a software.
Real money too, not just like a million here, a million there. I mean, it's real money, even the government. So
I just wanted to bring that up as something that maybe we could discuss later on.
So I don't know if we have anybody from the patent office here who wants to take that on.
If so,
but we can certainly find them over the coffee break. I want to thank Jeremy, Chris, and Darren so much for walking us through this panel. So everybody, yay! Oh, good, the microphone's on. Okay, so coffee. Everybody is so welcome. So about 30 minutes you got. Please come back here about 11:20, and we'll go into the last couple of sessions before we break for lunch. Thank you.